First step in removing the heads and cylinders is to remove this valve cover. That was step 12, remove cylinder head covers. Now it says remove rocker arm shafts. So I've got 2 bolts here, one here, that I need to remove to get the rocker shaft off of there. With the bolts out, the rocker shaft just lifts off like that. I'm going to set it in the valve cover here. So this is what it looks like now. Let's see what the next step is. It says 12 was remove cylinder head covers, remove rocker arm shafts, remove cylinder heads, remove push rod tube. Okay, so we take the cylinder head off before taking these push rod. These are the push rod tubes. Oh, these are the push rod tubes right here. These guys. And then these are the push rods that go through them. So I've got to take the head off. What that means is this bolt has got 4 of them here, and then you've got 4 of them in here that all need to come off of there. I got the head off. Here's what it looks like. You can see there's quite a bit of carbon buildup in there, but overall they don't look that bad. With a little bit of cleanup, I'm going to take them to a shop and have a valve job done on them, have the valves ground, and have them check the valve guides, make sure the heads are in good shape to put back on. And then here's what it looks like in the cylinders. You can see there's a lot of carbon on those top of those pistons. And it looks like there's a pretty big gap around the pistons, so they might be pretty worn. What I'm going to do is raise the pistons to top dead center and check the deck height of the stock motor and see how that compares to the deck height that I'm going to need when I put the new cylinders on. To measure deck height, I've got this set right on the edge of the cylinder. It's reading 0, and then I'm going to slide it down. You can see that little thing come down. It reads 57 thousandths. Let me go back up and I'll try it again for another. It reads 59, 58. So it's somewhere, you can see where that little goes up. This is up to 0, and then watch this little thing come down. And that reads 58 thousandths. I pulled the cylinders off, it exposes the piston, and then I used needle nose pliers and pulled these little retainer rings out of each end of the piston. Wrist pin were in these holes right here. You can see that little groove that they go in. And then I gently tapped this wrist pin out far enough that I can remove the piston. Put a rag there so I don't have a lot of stuff falling in there, but this is the piston from the number 4 cylinder. Got that off. What I'm going to do is take off the rings, put it in the barrel, and check the ring end gap and see how worn this is. This is end play for number 4 connecting rod. About 44. About 44 thousandths, that's a lot. I've removed cylinders 3 and 4. Now I'm going to remove cylinders 1 and 2. Again, I start with the valve cover and then remove the rocker arm shaft. Valve cover is off. Next I'll remove the rocker arm shaft. And I'll remove the push rods. These just lift out like this. And you just get all 4 of those. You can see they have oiling holes in them, so they drip a little bit of oil. But those just lift out. And I'll put those over on the bench. Now it's time to remove the head bolts you can see I've got these 4 that are in here. They're well oiled, so they're going to be easier to take off. Then there's the 4 out here that get really hot and oxidized. They're going to be a little tougher. I put a little PB blaster on these guys. Hopefully they'll come out okay. I got the number 1 and 2 cylinder head off. You can see there's a lot of carbon buildup on the top of these pistons. I'm going to have to check, see if it's running too rich, but you can see I've got that off. I measured the deck height on these 2 as well. This little piece of tin right here that deflects the air, you can just pop that off with a screwdriver before you take the barrels off. To get the wrist pin clips out, you just grab them with needle nose pliers, squeeze them together, and then pull it out like that. I put rags around the bottom of the piston because I don't want this clip to fall down inside the motor when I'm taking it out. The other side is similar. You squeeze it and pull it out. To get the wrist pin out, I brace the piston against these rods here to keep it, to hold it so it won't go sideways. And then I use an extension. I put it in here and I just gently tap it with the hammer while I hold the piston against these rods so that it's held firm, and I can just gently tap it through and tap it out of there. Doesn't take much, but you just don't want to put sideways force on that connecting rod. Now I'm checking the ring wear, and you can see it says compression rings, item number 6, compression rings gap is the wear limit. You see, wear limit is this column. The wear limit can go up to 35 thousandths on the gap. When it's new, it's 12 to 18 thousandths. That's for new parts. So I've got the ring in here. I use the piston to get it perfectly even. You can see this is one of the compression rings. This is the first compression ring. And when I check the gap, it's just about 20 thousandths. So it's a little worn from new, but it's well within the limits. The motor had pretty low compression, but it doesn't look like the rings were worn out. I'm checking the wrist pin bearing by sliding the new wrist pin in halfway, and then I move it back and forth towards the in and out direction longitudinally with the rod, and I can feel some play in there. And so I think these bearings are worn. Because I'm feeling some wear in these wrist pin bearings, I'm feeling like I need to get these cases apart. There's a couple other reasons too. You can see that this case, it doesn't have case savers in it, where they put helicoils in here to give it a bigger thread and make it stronger. This case has never had that done. And there's a risk of when I put the new cylinders on and torque them that it can pull out these rods. So I'd like to get that done. The other reason is I'd like to get these rods balanced. And you pretty much have to get the case apart because I'm going to balance the pistons. I want to balance the rods and make sure that it's a smooth running motor. And I'll also have, if I have it apart, I can have a machinist check all of the crankshaft, the camshaft, and make sure everything's in spec, and if not, have it machined so that everything is back to good condition. So for that reason, I think I'm going to take the rest of these things off and pull the cases apart and take it to a machinist. First is to pull off the oil filler tube here, and so I've taken the nuts off. Now I just need to lift it off of there and pull this part out of the hole. I had to remove this rubber boot from the bottom of it, and now I'm going to lift this off. With the oil filler off, you can see this is the orientation of that special gasket that they put on there. I think this is to avoid oil splashing up through that tube, but when you reassemble it, this is the orientation it's supposed to have. That's how it was when I took it off. Next, I'll pull the distributor off. You can see that there's a nut here that's got to come off, and then you can wiggle it out of there. And then after that, it's the fuel pump. It's got 2 nuts that got to come off of there to get it off. I took off the nuts to the oil cooler. There's one over there, and then there's 2 here. And so this should lift off. And this is important. If you look, these are the seals that it uses. There's a different kind that they use on the newer models. These are the older models, and the seals in the kit, they give you 2 or 3 different kinds. You have to use these kind on the older motors. After you take off the retaining nut, then the distributor, you can wiggle it and it comes out of there. And if you look down in there, there's a little spring, and you can see where it lines up with these tangs that fit down into those notches down there. That's how that comes out. My next step is to get the pulley off the front. To do that, I had to put a flywheel lock on the back. You can see this is set up where it can do either a 6-volt or a 12-volt flywheel. And this is the smaller 6-volt. So I've got that bolted on. It keeps this from turning so that then I can torque on this nut and get it off without the crankshaft spinning. I'm ready to go. This is a 30mm socket that fits on there, and I've got a ratchet handle with an extension, so I'm going to try to torque that off of there. The nut and washer came off actually really easily, but the difficult part now is to get a puller on here to grip into these, and you actually have to pry this thing off of here. So you have to use a puller. It's pressed onto here, and you can see there's a Woodruff key slot here. So you have to get a puller on there and pull this thing off. I'm going to try this setup right here. I've just got an inexpensive puller hooked up. I actually have the hooks facing outward, so it's pulling on this part of the pulley, which is pretty close to the center. You can see behind there, it's hard to get anything. I don't know if you can see it that well, but there just isn't a lot of space between those holes in the center hub. I had to use a socket to get it to bear on the heart, the big part of the shaft there. And then I'm going to take, this is a 15mm wrench, put on here and start turning and see if I can gently get that off of there. Okay, if you watch while I turn the wrench, you can see the pulley. Get my hand out of the way. You can see the pulley moving out. It's actually coming off pretty easily. I don't think there's enough force here to bend the pulley from where I'm holding it. So if I turn this, you can see this pulley sliding out. It's coming off pretty easily. So this setup is good. I'll show you just for reference. This is what I'm using. This is from Harbor Freight from years ago. I've used this thing so many times for all kinds of different things. And I have my own sets of attachments in here for using chains and hooks and bolts. And if you want to get the bearings out of the axle, I made this little thing that slips into the race and hooks onto the puller. So that thing's coming really handy. Back in the day, I think it was like $9 or something, so it's not too expensive, but they come in really handy. Okay, the pulley's off. That was actually pretty easy. You can see there's a key on the shaft here that keeps that from turning. You can also see those spirals. It turns out those spirals are there so that as the engine's turning, it's constantly feeding the oil back into the engine. That's pretty much how they keep it from leaking. Lots of interesting things about this VW design. The pulley off, you can see there are 2 screws here that hold this sheet metal on, and it has to be removed so that you can get to the oil pump, which you can see is down below. This is the oil pump cover right here, so I've got to get to that and get this sheet metal off. I've got both of these screws removed from there, and so this tin will just come straight off of there, and that's good because I can straighten it up and get it painted and cleaned up. But you see what it does is it exposes the oil pump. So the oil pump is behind here. In order to split these cases, you have to get this out, you also have to take off the oil strainer bolts on the bottom. Okay, now I'm going to take off the oil pump. So first I've got to take off these 4 bolts and remove the cover. This is what the oil pump looks like with the cover off. You can see those gears that turn and force the oil through there. You can see this is the top gear that I pulled out, and it has this slotted end. That actually fits into the slot of the camshaft. So as the camshaft is turning, it's turning this one, and then this is a driven oil pump gear that goes, this one just slides into the bottom one, and this is the driven gear that pumps oil. The oil pump out, I took out the bolt that goes through here that's pinching that, and I loosened these 3 guys just so that taking the pressure off the oil pump. You can see that there's a gasket and a surface right here that the oil pump fits in there into a hole, and it's got to be pulled out. This is the case right here, and then this is the oil pump, and you can see the side of it right here. I'm going to pull off the oil pump, and you can see this is the tool that you use for it. You put this bar into these little side holes that you can see on each side, and then you use this bracket to pull it apart. So I'm going to set this up, see if I can get that pulled out. Well, this tool that I got, it's supposed to slip into this hole and then fit in to the other one, and I don't see a way to get it to fit. It must be for a different pump, because there's a hole there and then there's a hole here, and I can't get it to fit. So what I had to do was I got a similar size piece of thread and I welded a bar across there so that I could slip it into here and then slide it across into this other guy right here. So that way I can get it slipped in there because it's smaller and it fits. So I'm going to try that with the bracket that I had and see if I can use this to get the pump out of there. I got it in there, and now I'm just going to take and turn this nut. And you know what? I can see it. If you look carefully, you can see this crack. It's coming out of there. It's actually working. It's actually pulling the pump out. So this is working. So using that, I was able to get the pump out. This is what it looks like when you take it out, and then that's what the engine looks like with it out. But it took a puller to get it out of there without messing it up. Now I'm going to take off the pressure plate. So there's these 6 bolts around here that have to come off, and you undo them evenly because that pressure plate has a lot of force on it. So to keep from warping it, you just undo them evenly all the way around, a little at a time. When you take the pressure plate off, you can see the clutch plate is right behind that. So this clutch plate, I've replaced this before, and I've had this flywheel turned when I had the motor out before. So you can see the surface there is actually really good. And then to get the flywheel off, it's a matter of loosening this gland nut, which is torqued to 217 foot-pounds, so it's really tight on there. I've been told not to use an impact driver to get it off, so I've got a tool I'm going to use to get it off. This is the tool I'm going to use. It fits on the gland nut like that, and then it's got a toothed wheel that you turn here. It works for both the 12 volt and the 6 volt. 12 volt's a little bit bigger, so you can see this is set up for the 12 volt because I can spin this thing. It's a little bit longer. What I have to do is switch it out for this one. This one actually is made for the 6 volt flywheel. I'm going to put that one on there and try turning it and see if I can get it off. This is the setup. Tools on there. I'm using a 3/8 inch wrench is all it takes to do this with an 11mm socket. And then as I turn this down, you can see it's slowly undoing that gland nut. Once it's loosened, I can just use a regular 1/2-inch ratchet with a 36mm socket and just undo the gland nut the rest of the way like this. You can see it's a big bolt, and it takes a big socket to do it. I had it because I've done this before, like I said, to get the clutch resurfaced. I had to pull the flywheel off. With the gland nut out, I just grab the wheel and then just kind of work it back and forth from the top and the bottom, and it'll work its way off. That's what it looks like with the flywheel off. You can see I've replaced that seal, rear seal, before too. It looks pretty new. I put the mount fixture back on there because I want to put it back on the engine stand now that I have the flywheel off of there. Then I can rotate it around and undo the bolts and so on. It'll be a little easier. To take off this oil strainer, you basically just take these 6 bolts out and then pull it off of there. I took the drain plate off, and now I'm just going to very gently lift up the strainer and get it off of there. This is what it looks like when you take the oil strainer out of there. I'm taking each of these studs out of the engine. To do it, I'm locking 2 nuts together on the end, and then as I turn it, it will turn. You can see it's turning the entire rod. So those are tight, and then I move on to the next one. So I'm going to take all of the rods out. You can see there's 4 for each cylinder, so there's a bunch of them. I've started to get the case separated. Most of them, they say, come apart pretty easily. This one hasn't. It's been really difficult. I pounded on these studs, like they said, with a rubber hammer, and that yielded nothing. So what I did is there's a pin, an alignment pin in here, and there's an alignment pin down in here. And so what I had to do, they say never to do this, but I had to use, I took a really thin knife like this and I just tapped it in to the case in those 2 areas because it's really thick right there, and you can work on the outside of the pin and not the inside where it's going to seal. I tried really hard not to mess up the sealing this, but I did get it to start to crack open a little bit, and now I've got some PB Blaster in there soaking, and I'm going to see if I can just very gingerly start to tap it apart without using any more metal. They said if you have to use a wedge, you can use wood or plastic, but I had to use essentially a knife blade that's the only skinny enough thing to get in there. So I'm going to try it a little more and see what happens. Well, one thing that's been working is I have this little hose spreader. This is for removing like radiator hoses. You squeeze it like pliers. And so I was able to get this into the crack. I squeeze on it, so that's giving some force to spread it. And then I would just tap on these studs right here, and it seems to be slowly spreading it apart. I'm going to do a little on the bottom, and I think I can work this apart. That seems to be working. I just put some force with this spreader and tap on the studs, and it's slowly coming apart. So I think I can get it from here. Well, I got them up, got the cases apart. I'm glad I did, because this cam looks like it could use a polishing. And I also, if you look closely here, there's that Bakelite part that's it's the fuel pump rod guide. It's made out of, it's right here, it's made out of some kind of brown Bakelite. It snapped off when I was trying to work it out of there, and so I'm going to have to pry it back up and out through there. And I couldn't get the this is the distributor drive. I couldn't get it out because I think this was in the way, but I might have to work those out from the inside. And one of the holes, you can see where these guide pins go in here. There's one that goes in there, there's one that goes in over here. And you can see where I worked it a little bit around the edge, and it messed it up a little bit, which I can smooth down, but you can see I still have plenty of sealing surface on the inside of those. Same here. I worked this one a little bit. You can see some of the marks on my thing, but at least I've got a good sealing surface on the inside of those. So I think I'm going to be okay. This is what this half looks like. This is what the other half looks like. I thought that in 1965 with this motor there were bearings for the cam, but this looks like the cam is just running in the case. I think you can have these bored for cam bearings. I'll have to ask my machinist. But I got it apart, and now I can take it to the machinist and have him check everything over. One thing you'll notice is I got the cases apart, and I did it without having these lifters fall out. They said you're supposed to keep track of which holes they go and keep them back in the same holes when you reassemble it. So I did that by keeping the case almost up and down, just slanted a little bit as I pulled the half off so that they stayed in there. And then these cam followers are in their holes, so I'm gonna get a Sharpie pen and mark them and talk to my machinist to see if I have to keep them in the same holes, keep them lined up, or maybe he's gonna regrind them and it doesn't matter. I'll have to see. You look here, these are the rings that set the end play, and it looks like there's 3 of them, and they come right off the end of the crankshaft. And when I took it apart, this is the crank seal that came out of there. So that was what was on this end of the crankshaft.